Welcome to Untamed Blossoms, the podcast where we celebrate the untamed journey of womanhood. Here, we tell the stories of incredible women who have embraced their authenticity, inspiring others to do the same.
From entrepreneurs to artists, activists to adventurers, we share triumphs, challenges, and the beauty of self-discovery. These are the stories of women blazing their own trails, breaking free, and blooming unapologetically.
Join us to connect, be inspired, and celebrate the power of women's stories. Together, let's rewrite the rules and embrace our wildness.
Welcome to Untamed Blossoms. I'm your host, Amanda Riley.
And I'm Christy Riley. Welcome to the show, everybody.
I have a problem with something, and I need everyone to know. The year was like 2019. And I looked around and I said, why does anyone wear jeans? Okay?
Ever.
Why?
Right.
They're stiff and they're not comfortable. And people have disagreed with me. Fine. Okay.
Not to mention for women, it is the absolute hardest thing to find a pair of jeans that fit you correctly.
If they fit your hips, they don't fit your ass or your fucking quads, or your calves.
Right.
The style of jeans. I have the smallest legs you've ever seen. Most chairs my legs dangle from.
Right.
It is horrible.
It's hard. Really hard.
I don't like it.
Yeah. And you gave them up.
I gave them up.
Come pandemic.
I said never again.
Never.
I got rid of every jean item I own. Okay. Fast forward. We had our clothing swap. I decided I'll grab a couple pair of jeans for things, right?
Try them again.
And I do this with almost everything. When I know I don't like something, I'm like, oh, maybe I've changed. Plot twist. No. If I fucking hate something, I'm going to continue hating it. I know that about me. But I refuse to believe that an evolved human like myself can't change her opinion.
Well, sometimes we reserve the right, and we do.
Sure.
However, in this case, no.
I have these jeans I've worn maybe a couple times. I'm like, God, this is a nightmare. So fast forward, we get these overalls. They're so cute.
Yes.
Okay.
In the winter.
I like them.
Yeah.
On this morning, I was putting them on. I said, oh, these are so stiff. Like, I feel like I can't move in them. And I'm like, oh my God.
These are the stretchiest denim things you've ever
But it's still jean
by the way.
It's jean adjacent. And I realized that's where the brand page was about to go on before we started recording. They're too jean adjacent for me. And I know that makes me ridiculous, but I'm like, why do I feel trapped in clothing? Maybe it's a past life thing I need to get.
It's definitely, you do like free flowing.
I hate things around my neck.
Yeah.
There has to
tight
be
underwear period.
Ugh.
You know. Yeah.
Bras.
Oh.
Most of my bras are just bralettes. They have no structure to them.
Yeah.
I had to wear them for my professional job.
Right.
Because can't be out here looking like that. But for the most part, I wear bralettes because I cannot stand the restriction.
Right.
I sleep naked.
Yeah.
I don't want to be restricted.
Right. Nor do you want to wear clothes, really. It's really that you're a feral cat. Let's talk about your feral cat. Okay. It is in her human design chart that she is like feral in the summertime. You are in the sunshine, meant to be outside, meant to be running barefoot in the wild. It is in your chart.
Yeah.
I feel like we share that. How you more so, it's really in your chart. So it is spring in Ohio and it's starting to get warm. And I think that the feral cat is just
she's feeling caged. She's been looking out the window for months. Let me out. And I'm like, not time.
And I had to strap on the denim today and she had a revolt.
She's like, whoa. You just started your summer of swole lifting program and now you're trying to put me in denim? On the same fucking day?
You guys, this morning she says, be ready for your swole summer workout.
And then I did share a meme of Dwayne Rock Johnson.
Oh, we're here for it. I don't know if you could tell them.
Anyway, sorry about that. I just had to get that off my chest because I don't know.
I promised her now we're just going to wear summer dresses for the summer. We're going to get some more of these maybe for the winter time because you didn't seem to mind them in the winter time.
The winter?
Yeah.
because I'm so cold.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me.
Right.
The moment that the spring air slaps my face, I'm like,
or we just get a bunch of big baggy Untamed Blossom sweatshirts that we wear in the wintertime, and that's what it is. Yeah, we'll see.
So that's my mental breakdown of the day.
It's also been cold here again this week, and we're sad about that, and we're ready to be over it. And it is going to be up to 70 today, but cloudy and possibly a severe thunderstorm. So,
But then like the following, like the 10-day forecast
is nice.
You look at the last 5, it's like mid 70s sunny.
Yeah.
So we just got to get through the next couple of days. I think we'll be fine.
I'm happy for for the summer or spring to be here. So yeah.
Totally. My eyes started twitching out of nowhere. It's because of those restrictions on my body.
Am I going to have to go get you some new clothes?
No,
if we come back when the guest arrives and she's got a new outfit on, you will know what has gone down.
Honestly, I all summer long would live in a muumuu, no problem.
Yeah.
Like that's my ideal shape. Tightness. Because it's none of those things. It's shapeless with no tightness.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, what's new with you? Any mental breakdown?
Juju and G Paul. We called it the spring fling yesterday. Ooh. So my children have to go all the places. They're married and they have in-laws and grandparents still that are holding events. And I just decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to put myself in the mix of that. And so typically we celebrate holidays on off days of the holiday. So around the holiday. And that was our day yesterday. So we colored eggs and did an Easter egg hunt. And
so fun.
Yeah. And so we and just had dinner, and it was just the kids. So it was just our children and grandbabies. So it was nice.
Yeah.
Just for the family to sort of congeal, and being a blended family it's kind of important to just have that moment where we're all together and to kind of, there's a bunch of different ages and so getting everybody together to have a collective moment, it was nice. So
love that.
The weather was great, and it was good food, good times. It was great. Good time. Track meet on Saturday, track meet that won't ever go away. It was a very long invitational. There was a lot of schools there,
Yeah.
So it's like an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
For your kid to run for like a minute,
Yeah.
So, and then you wait, and then you wait a long, long time, and then they run for another minute, and then you're like, okay, done.
Yeah.
But it was good. We had a good weekend. What about you? Did a lot of work.
I just worked the whole weekend. Yeah. I was just talking to someone about this. I think it was either yesterday or the day, maybe yesterday actually. But I prefer to be busy with lots of different types of things to do versus a rigid schedule of the same thing. Right. Like someone was like, you don't really get a weekend anymore. And I was like, don't care, because I'm not so cash out mentally and emotionally come Friday. Like Friday afternoon, I just remember thinking, okay, just get through today. You know what I mean? Then you'll have the whole weekend. But then I would have Saturday, and then Sunday would be Sunday scaries the whole day. And so I don't think
you mean when you were in corporate America?
Yes.
Yeah.
When you don't have that perspective, I get how, now being in real estate, they're like, oh, you don't ever get a weekend now. And I get how that could seem. But when you are on the flip side of that, when you really only have one weekend day and the whole day you're trying so desperately to enjoy it because you basically have Saturday,
right?
Sunday, the spiraling starts.
Right.
So for me, I'm like, oh, I just got to show beautiful homes all weekend and meet a bunch of new people.
Right. Which you love.
I like having random days. Today, Mondays usually feel like a weekend day to me because I only do a little real estate stuff and mostly
you're sort of in the transition, right? Like your plan is not to do other things and real estate eventually. Like it should be this and real estate and not other stuff. But the transition from what you're making money with to real estate takes a while. It takes 6 to 8 months in real estate to start making money. So, that you're in that transition where you're doing all the things at the same time. And so it's a lot, but it's also exciting when you're doing something new and you like it and you're learning a lot. You love learning. So when you're learning, it doesn't feel like it's overwhelming. And then hopefully the goal is that there will be a balance at the end of that. When you do start making money, you can take these things off your plate. So,
and even the stuff that is like on my plate, like today before I came over here, I picked up some staging from a house. listened to a podcast.
Yeah.
Drove, picked up a large metal clock, put it in the Jeep, took it to a storage unit. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
It for me, it's just
none of it's stressful.
None of it's stressful.
Yeah.
Like, I think real estate can be stressful, of course, and I've definitely seen that side of it. But just like the pressure and stress versus just stress and chaos.
Yeah,
it's just different.
Yeah.
So anyway,
well, you're not managing. You're not in charge of managing people at this point. You are going to be managing people in the real estate world for sure, and personalities, but not being in charge of them in the corporate world. So it's just different, and it's
all different.
Yeah, and it's exciting.
And I think people know sometimes how corporate can be stressful, but I think people think real estate's super fun all the time, but it is really stressful.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm going into it blind thinking like, oh my gosh, this is all sunshine and rainbows. Like, I know it's difficult, but it's just they're so different from each other.
Yeah.
It's not even comparable. They're just different.
Yeah.
So,
real estate is a binding contracts.
Yeah.
Like it's not something you just kind of get in lightly and get out lightly. And you're responsible as the agent for all those details. And, and even though you're not a practicing attorney, you're responsible for people entering into these contracts with an open mind and understanding what they're getting themselves into. And so it can definitely be stressful if things aren't divulged or you find out things and negotiating it and emotions.
Nothing is as stressful though as sitting on a call with other lawyers and people asking you, not a lawyer, what they think you should do when you're on a legal call asking the legal counsel for help. You know what I'm saying?
Of the corporate company that you work for, and they're asking you what you think you should do.
Yeah, I'm like,
I'm calling you because
here's the thing.
You're supposed to know what I'm supposed to do.
This is a call for me to tell you what's happening so you can tell me what to do.
Right.
Please do not ask me what to do. I have a communication degree.
Right. You have a law degree. I'm asking you from the court standpoint, the law standpoint, what I should do.
Yeah. So, I've had my fair share of legal woes. Anywho, our guest today, I'm so pumped. I cannot wait.
Colette came to us through just showing up to one of our events, and she's a fascinating lady. And we'll get into more of her details here in a little bit, but relocated from out of state and is reestablishing her life.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to hear all the fun things.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Here for it.
Yeah. Colette, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so excited to have you. We met you through you coming to some of our events here at Untamed Blossoms on the farm. And you were a brave lady. You just showed up, didn't know anyone.
Yeah.
And I love that about you. And then I've heard in talking to you, learned about you that you were really just trying to reestablish yourself, that you're fairly new to Ohio.
Yes.
And had moved here from Georgia.
Yep. Augusta.
And was just looking to try to find your own tribe again.
Yes.
And that's hard to do, I would think, post-retirement, right?
It is.
Yeah.
When you're young, and your kids are young, you naturally meet people through school, through work. When you're retired and your kids are grown, you have to really reach out and find ways. And when you said find your tribe, that is exactly the way I look at it. Find your tribe. Yeah.
It's always interesting too, because when you do find something you're interested in, you go and it's not always the right vibe, and you're like, sometimes you're like, where?
Yeah, I like that topic, but that group of people were not quite what I was looking for. I didn't feel quite comfortable. Yeah. And I'm assuming that since you've come back to several of our events that you feel comfortable.
Yes. Well, I was excited to hear about your focus on women supporting women.
Yeah.
That's really important to me. And it was nice to find a group that was one of your stated objectives.
It is
trying to find a way for women to support women.
Yeah.
That was attractive to me.
And it's so great that, I was attracted to you because of your love for cats. And so, I think it's funny that when you meet different people, you never know what's going to stick. Right. And I think after you left, so many people were like, oh my gosh, she was so nice. There was just something about her. And I think that's also what sparked our interest in wanting you to be on the show, is just that you're one of those people who captivate other people and you have an amazing story to tell.
Well,
and
how
we're
flattering.
Just so excited.
Thank you. I have to talk about the cats for just a second.
Yes, please. I'm here for the cat.
Because I've always been a dog person. My family, I did not grow up with cats. And then I married my husband. We're going on our 3rd year anniversary. And he was definitely a cat person and not a dog person. And I found out I am highly allergic to cats. I mean, just horribly allergic to cats. So we got to the point where I couldn't visit him at his house because he said, I have to spend 2 days cleaning. So let's just visit at your house. But then I had to start taking immunotherapy shots for bee venom allergy, which I'm very allergic to bees, and it's actually kind of life threatening. So I thought, well, if I have to take the shots for that, I might as well get the shots for the cats. And then we can get cats.
Yeah.
So we just did. And I was, the last event, I shared the pictures of the cats. And they're wonderful. They're so awesome.
You guys are loving them.
Yes, we are.
And you're not reacting to them.
No, it's wonderful.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Weekly shots have not been fun, but worth it.
I have avoided that at all costs, but it's something I desperately need to do because I'm also allergic to cats.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. Which is my perpetual congestion is probably that. So
did that show up on your biofeedback scan, by the way?
It did not. And I was like, if she tells me anything about these cats, I'm going to have to leave.
Oh, no.
They're my children.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Yeah. It wouldn't have mattered if she did tell you that. You'd have just been like, well, just fix it with whatever voodoo you're doing over there and move on with it. Tell me no more. Well, Colette, take us back to the beginning a little bit of your lifetime. Just give us a little backstory on you, kind of where it all started.
Sure. I come from a family of 5 siblings, and my grandmother lived with us the whole time I was growing up, from the time I was born until the time I left home. So there were 8 of us in our house. And it was sort of a traditional, mom stayed home, took care of the kids, dad went to work. We kind of ran wild. We lived out in the country, and mom had a big cowbell, that she would ring to bring us in when it was dinner time, sort of as I look back, sort of a Leave It to Beaver, very traditional upbringing, very supportive. My parents were fabulous, absolutely fab. And of course,
was it here in Ohio?
In Ohio, yes. In Ohio. We moved several times. My father worked for the gas company and was transferred a few times. So we moved a few times, but always in Ohio. But as I look back on my life now, I didn't, at the time, of course, you don't realize it when you're a kid, that not every family was like mine. My parents, without question, gave us unconditional love and support. They didn't always agree with us, especially me. Of the 5 kids, I would have to say I was the one that was probably the difficult child. And I think my sisters and my brother would agree with that as well. But anyway, even though they didn't agree with us, I always felt like I was loved. I might not agree with you, and I might, have to punish you because, you did something that was against the rules, but I still love you. And it wasn't until I got a little older and started seeing other people's family dynamics that I realized that's not always true. And I was very fortunate, I think, to grow up with that sort of family. And I'm still very close with my siblings. There are 4 girls and my brother's in the middle. So 2 girls, a boy, and 2 girls. And
where are you at in the mix?
I'm the second to the oldest.
Second to the oldest.
And we all, as we got careers and got married, we moved all over. I had a sister that spent her career in the Navy and lived in Spain and Puerto Rico. And I had a sister that was in Arizona. We all moved, but then we all have come back to Ohio as we've gotten older. My brother's the only outlier. He lives in Connecticut and has lived there for a long time. But the 4 girls were real close, still are. For years, we would have what we called a girls' weekend. And as we were establishing our careers and families and getting married, 2 rules: no children, no husbands. So wherever we were, we would get together for a long weekend at somebody's house. And when we were younger, we'd go out. One time we rented a van, so we could go to a partying, been to museums, we've done all pottery. Just all kinds. One time we got together and went to you had to bring things from the drugstore that you wouldn't normally use, that you see on those late night ads, like how to get rid of your leg hair and, how to make yourself look 10 years younger. And we bought all this crap and we spent the whole weekend just doing horrible things to ourselves.
Oh my!
We had a great time, just a great time. And as we've gotten older and we all live in Ohio now, two of us are still working. They're teachers. But as my parents have aged, my mother passed 2 years ago. My father's getting older. To have that support system with sisters is just, I don't know how people do it.
Yeah.
Who don't have that sort of support system, whether it's biological sisters or,
Right.
sisters
Right.
because you love each other.
Yeah.
You've got to have that support system.
Yeah.
And I've had very supportive and wonderful men in my life, but something about my sisters, and
Yeah.
the women tribe that I had when I lived in Georgia, just, you can't replace it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you all grew up there and then you all moved away when
Yes.
you got married and all of that. So what about you? What was your story? Did you meet a man and move away? How did that look?
Well, initially when I got out of school, my, of course, with 5 kids and my father working, we were on our own as far as our college, paying for college. And I was planning to go to Kent State University and become a research scientist. That was a plan. I'd signed up and everything. But then I got an apartment with a friend in the summer, and I started working at the telephone company. This was in Norwalk, Ohio, at the telephone company. And I found out that they would pay for my education as long as I got an A or a B.
Mm.
Of course, they don't pay to be research scientists. They only pay for, business courses.
Right.
So I didn't go to Kent State. I ended up working full-time and going to school full-time. Took forever to get my degree. I transferred quite often. But at that time in my life as a young woman, I was very much a feminist. This was in the 70s, and I was really a militant feminist. I was, I was part of the NOW organization, if you're familiar with NOW. It's not around anymore. I used to travel around and give speeches.
What did that stand for, the NOW? For those
National Organization of Women.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I used to give speeches on the Equal Rights Amendment. That's when we were trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. And I actually gave speeches to Rotary clubs, to try to educate people on this is what it is, this is what it isn't. And I was, never going to get married. I was never going to have children. I looked at my mother and said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to just be somebody's wife and take care of children. How sad, she gave up her life. Now, as I look back at my mother, I think, what a strong woman she was. She was just amazing. There are so many things I learned from her that I'm so grateful for. Yeah. And I'm thankful that I had an opportunity to tell her before she passed that I appreciated her, even though I didn't when I was younger. I can remember one example in particular. When I was in high school, and my mother had made coffee for my father and brought it into him. I don't know if it was in their bedroom or in the living room, and she served it to him. And I just said, no, how can you do that? How awful that you wait on him. And she just took me to task and said, you have no idea what he does for me. And our relationship is private. And I thought, well, good for you, Mom. And now when I look back, I think, they had their relationship and it was separate from their being parents.
Right.
I learned a lot from her. Yeah. But then I did, my husband was 9 years older than I was. I married him when I was 25. And, I was thinking back this morning to when we first started dating, and we met at a mutual friends party. And, there was some attraction, and, he invited me to go to dinner with him, which I did. And afterwards, we were married for 37 years. And so at some point in our marriage, I look back and we were talking about that. We decided we really didn't like each other very much on that first date, because he thought, this feminist, she hates men. She's one of those, really not interested in this.
She doesn't like me.
No, she's too angry. And he was was in the final throes of a very angry divorce. He had a little girl who was 4 years old, and it was not pleasant. I mean, it was not a good situation. Most divorces aren't, I would imagine. Some are happier, and I thought, well, I'm not interested in that either. What a yucky, I don't need that emotional mess. And we look back on it and said, why did we ever go out the second time? You didn't like me and I didn't like you. What happened? But there must have been some attraction, because then we dated and we got married. And, our early life together, the first 5 years before my son was born, working on our careers and our houses and traveling. And we both liked to golf. And he was very handy. We bought old houses and fixed them up. And we had set a goal for ourselves then that I would finish, because I was still working on getting my degree at the time. We would work on, both of us working, finish my degree. And then because he was 9 years older than I was, we would both work, and then he would be able to retire early and take care of, we were going to have a child, and he would stay home and take care of the child. That was our plan. And it worked out that way, which was wonderful, that we put together that plan and it worked. So I had my son when I was 30. And then for 5 years, I stayed home with him while I was finished my bachelor's, got my master's, because I have the greatest respect for women who go to school full-time, work full-time, and have children full-time. I don't know how they do it. I knew myself and I knew I couldn't. I figured, well, I can do 2 or 3, so right now I'm going to stay home for a few years, finish my degree. And then the idea was we would both work for a while until we would follow my career, which we did. And then my husband was able to retire early, and he took care of our son. It was amazing. It was just amazing I understood at the time, and I remember thinking, I understand why men have traditionally been able to advance in their careers easier than women in that time frame, because they have somebody at home taking care of stuff. Mm-hmm. The house, something happens.
It's a full-time gig, man. Between child rearing and taking care of a household, it's a full-time job.
Well, I mean, if something happens, your hot water heater breaks, somebody has to be home. The car breaks down, or the child gets sick, or and unfortunately, at least at that time, and I think probably still some today, it's assumed that the woman's going to be the one, your child's sick, you're going to take time off work and stay home. Well, if you're really ambitious, you guys have both worked in the corporate world, you can't do that. I mean, you have to work a lot of hours. You have to be able to travel. You cannot just say, oh, my son's sick, I'm not going to be there at the board meeting. I had to make this big presentation. Sorry, I can't be there. I mean, it made it so much easier to have, and my husband really leaned into it. He loved it. He started cooking. He took care of the house. He took care of the yard. Nice. He was very much a handyman. So we always bought a house that needed work. And he absolutely loved it. And it was perfect timing for my son, because he was an only child, and he was at that age where you don't really need a babysitter. He was 11, 12 years old. But, a young man home alone.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I mean, opportunities for...
Right.
For stuff,
For stuff.
Of course, if you talk to my son now, he's like, oh, it wasn't much fun having dad around all the time. But he taught him, he was his soccer coach. He taught him how to build a screened-in porch on the back of the house. He took him skiing. They went boating together. They went biking. And it allowed me to really lean in and focus on that career.
And what did you get your bachelor's and master's in?
Business.
Business, okay.
Right. And unfortunately, wasn't a scientist. Although years later, I talked to a guy who worked for me who was in the business world, but had spent most of his career as a research scientist doing exactly what I wanted to do. And I said, wow, I still have an interest in that. And you have regrets. And I often think back, how would my life be different if I had done that? And he said, in that field, there are very, very few people at the top, and they get to do really interesting, exciting, wonderful things, and they're paid well. He said, there are a whole lot of people under that are sitting in labs doing, not fun work and not making a lot of money.
Right.
He said, and of course I was happy in my career, and I wasn't ready to turn it over and
right.
become a scientist at that point.
A whole
No.
new thing. Yeah.
No.
What did you see like at that time being a woman and getting, a master's degree in business? Like how was that and how were you treated in the workforce?
Well, initially, before I got my degree, that time I was talking about when I was working and was a militant feminist, we were talking about this earlier, that I'm not sure that a lot of young women today recognize how recent some of the discrimination that we experienced really is. In my lifetime, in the early 70s, when the 401k program first came out, I had to have my husband sign for me to have the money come out of my...
Who was not working himself.
Well, at that time he was.
Oh, okay.
But at a different place. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
It was my
It was your
salary.
paycheck.
Yeah, he had to sign in order for me to be able to put money in my 401, and he had to sign for what I was putting it in for.
Mm.
The guys didn't have to do that.
Mm-mm.
I had to, the first job, I had to tell them when my last period was because they wouldn't hire me if I was pregnant.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine today?
Oh my
If
gosh.
on a job app, they said, when was the last day of your last period?
It's illegal currently, which is
Well,
great.
yeah, thank goodness.
Thank God.
Well, and at that time,
Thanks to people like you who really fought for that.
wow, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
that was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I remember at the time there was a young woman I worked with who got pregnant, and you were not in the company that I worked for, and I think this was very common practice. You were not allowed to use your vacation time, even if it was accrued, to take time off to have a baby. You had to take pregnancy leave, which doesn't exist anymore. But back then there was something called pregnancy leave, and you were required to take pregnancy leave. It was unpaid. You couldn't take your vacation because it was paid. So, if you were a woman, who needed the money, you didn't have a choice.
And think about how hard it would be to get back in the workforce then.
Oh, absolutely.
After taking that financial hit and then having, and probably for the most part, just realizing you can't or you don't have the support to go back into the workforce after that.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And you were on leave, which meant there was no guarantee that you would have the same job when you came back.
I've heard that was a practice that happened often where a maternity leave or a pregnancy leave would happen. You wouldn't get paid. You would inquire about coming back and they would be like, we don't have your position any longer.
Right. We filled it.
Yeah.
Sorry, we don't have any openings.
Yeah.
It happened.
We couldn't wait for you.
And if you had accrued, 3 or 4 weeks vacation and said, well, I'll take my vacation. No, we're not allowed. Which I don't understand the thinking there, but anyway.
Seemingly so, that these positions that women would hold, I don't think they thought that women could be both.
No.
So when you come back as a mom, how could you possibly do both?
Yeah.
And so it was by design to force women out of the workforce. And that, you said, was in the 70s, right?
Absolutely.
Like, that was not long ago.
No.
And I think when we think about the things that are happening now and some of the legislation that's being, prompted to pass, it's like this, it's a slippery slope.
I remember you were asking about after I got my degree, what was it like working? By that time, I had worked my way up into middle management in the company that I had worked for. And I remember at the time seeing, and I've worked for really good companies, but it's so ingrained, the discrimination against women, that for a woman to be promoted, again, by that time, there was starting to be some recognition that there's discrimination and companies were looking for ways, to move women up. But in order for a woman to be promoted, she had to be better than any of the men. And there were so many men that I saw that were promoted that were not excellent. They didn't deserve to be promoted. And I can remember at the time that we had kind of a running joke, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard this. Equality is not when a woman's promoted. Equality is when an incompetent woman is promoted at the same rate as an incompetent male. I saw a lot of men promoted because they golfed with, the guy. They looked right. They said the right things.
Right.
They knew how to play the game. And they got promoted regardless of their contribution. Whereas women who worked incredibly hard and were actually better at the job did not get the promotion. Towards the end of my career, before I retired, I saw less of that. And I think I was fortunate enough, I worked for a business services company, which was international, absolutely outstanding company. But I was at a high enough level that I think once you get to a higher level in organizations, you see less of that. At the lower levels and at the middle management levels, I still think you see a lot of that, where women have to work twice as hard to get promoted. Where at the higher levels, you've already proven it. You know, not that there aren't incompetent people everywhere and competent people, but I think it's a challenge that we still have to overcome.
And even if there are rules or policy in place, unconscious bias is a thing.
Absolutely.
So when you have a ton of men that are doing the hiring and promoting, it's not even as much as, okay, I have 2 qualified people here. Like, let me get, you just start those unconscious biases, sit there, and this person looks like me and they're interested in the same thing I am. And we can talk easier because I don't have to tiptoe around them. And those things just live there. And that's why it's important to have hard conversations with men, to men, about other men, because it's not something that I think, let's give them benefit of the doubt, most of the time they're doing purposefully, but it lives there.
Absolutely. And there's a lot, again, you know, and I know both of you have been in positions where you've hired people. You know, we have HR departments and we have lots of rules and regulations about how you hire, what you do, what you don't do, applications, interview, you know, there's all that. And companies are very careful to make sure they're following the rules now, for the most part. I mean, there are obviously exceptions, but for the most part. However, when it comes to hiring a person, let's say you're looking to promote somebody internally in an organization. If I'm the hiring manager, what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to call the person they work for and say, well, now, you know, tell me the real scoop here. Is this person somebody I want to have hire? So a lot of the decisions for promotions are informal. Mm-hmm. You know, it may look the same on paper. You know, this person is equal to this person, but the decisions are made based on recommendations. And if, you know, if there are a lot of good old boys out there, they're going to call the other good old boy and he'd say, well, yeah, you know, we golf on Friday together. And, you know,
he's a good dude. He's a good guy.
You'll like him. Yeah, you'll like him.
Easygoing.
And I don't know her. Yeah. I don't know. You know, they may not say anything against her, but.
And women are way more often described as they like to stir the pot or they like to rock the boat or you know, they're fine. They're really opinionated in meetings.
Yes.
And
that whole aggressive versus assertive thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a hard thing for me to learn. That was a really hard thing for me to learn. Early in my career, I believed, because of what I saw, that I couldn't be soft. You know, I had to be really tough in order to make it. And I think partially that was true, you know, because women are, it's sort of a no-win situation. If you're soft, you're seen as too soft. And if you're rough, you're seen as, well, she's, you know, the battle axe. We don't want to.
She's way too aggressive.
She's way too aggressive. So you have to walk a fine line. And I walked the line where, you know, I've had folks tell me that we thought you were the ice queen because, you know, I turned off my feminine side completely at work. And then throughout my career as I got older, and I actually thank somebody that I worked with, a woman, who demonstrated to me that it's possible, unfortunately I learned it late in my career, to be feminine and to be a woman and to talk like a woman and to act like a woman and still be really good at your job and get respect from people because you are good at your job. There's a way to do it.
I do think that in some company, I do believe it's company and personnel also though, because in some companies I worked for, no matter what, like I worked for a really, really big Fortune 500 company where no matter what you did, it just seemed impossible to find that balance.
Yeah.
And then I worked with other smaller companies with a boss who I feel like championed me all the time, and he was a man and he allowed me that space and cultivated that within me and gave me way more joy in my career. And, you know, until it still ended up at the same spot. But I definitely think it depends on who you're working with and what the values of those leaders are that will allow you to have the space to be both.
Yeah.
So,
and I think there's a lot of thanks to people like you who really fought for equality. We've gotten to a space now where I do think there are a lot of women in corporate America who can embrace their femininity and still be in places of power.
Right.
And not necessarily softness, but femininity, right? And
Yes.
then I can be assertive and I believe in myself, right? I'm very much in my own body and my own self, and I embrace my feminine and masculine energies, and I'm going to show up in the workforce knowing that I'm a force to be reckoned with.
Yes.
But I also like to get my nails done and my hair done and my
Right.
makeup done, and that's my personal thing. And it's not about trying to look a certain way, or it's just what I want, right?
Yes.
And so I think that we've come a long ways. We still obviously have a long way to go. But I do applaud that we have gotten to a place where I do see influencers and people out in the workforce that are really embracing their femininity and dressing feminine and
Yes.
and wearing loud colors and things that you wouldn't do,
Yes.
wearing bright pink in the
Yes.
workforce
Yes.
and showing up in a hot pink Barbie outfit and being totally okay with that. Like,
Yes.
I'm going to show up in my femininity the way I'm going to express my authenticity, and I'm still going to be in a place of power. And I think that's really cool. And that's what we're fighting for through all of what you fought through, and continuing what the fight that we're continuing fighting is. We just want women to have the choice.
Right.
If you want to stay at home and take care of your kids, great.
Yes.
Be a stay-at-home mom, right? We don't, that's a trad wife, if that's really what you want to be, great. We want you to have the choice.
Exactly.
We don't want choices to be taken away. If you want to stay home and take care of your man, more power to you and raise your kids. Absolutely. Go ahead. But we shouldn't have to ask permission to go and be a career woman, or to have a dual income family if we choose to, and to ask our husbands to step up and be equal partners to us if we are going to be a dual income family. We want equality. We want the same as you.
Yes.
If I want to leave the state to get a medical procedure, I can, because it's my right to, as it is a right of a man to do it. And there's no difference in that. That's what we're fighting
what
for.
is the quote? It's like, equality isn't a pie that we all get a piece of. Like, it's not like there's a limited amount of equality and then everyone has to fight for, who gets that slice. It's like, no, that's not what equality is. It's just that everyone gets the same fucking pie.
Right.
Like, we don't need to be handing it out saying you get this and you get that and you get this, and I think about it opposite too, is like, for so long, I remember there being a business dress code when I first started my corporate job. And if you were a woman and didn't look feminine enough, also, that was like it's business attire. Okay, well, I'm wearing slacks and a button-up shirt. Yeah, it's just not dressy. So what you're saying is I don't look feminine enough for you, right?
I don't have a dress on.
Because I'm
Oh, and I was not allowed to wear pants to work initially. Women were not allowed to wear pants to work.
Yeah.
You
It had to be
wear
a skirt. It had to be a skirt,
Yeah.
a matching blazer, usually,
Yes.
and some sort
Yes.
of top. Yeah.
Now, and then the dress code changed where you could wear pants if it was a pantsuit. It had to be a suit.
Yeah.
Talking 70s.
Right. Yeah.
That was even still the case in the early 80s as I was coming out of school. Like, I remember my parents, and that was still a thing in the early 80s, is that women were expected to wear skirts most of the time.
Yeah.
It's not that long ago, people. It's not been that long ago that this has been a thing.
Yeah. Okay. So, things worked out well with you and your husband, and you were able to follow your plan, which, again, that's so wonderful that you were able to say, this is what will work best for us. And it did.
Yes.
We
had some, some detours along the way, but in general, it worked out that way. It's funny. One of the offices I worked in, we were putting together a library for business books, self-help books and business books. And we were invited to bring stuff you had at home. And I had this book that was supposed to help you figure out your life and your career. And I gave it, to the library. Didn't think anything about it. It had been in my bookshelf for years. And somebody gave it back to me. One of my employees came and said, I think you really want this. And I said, why? And they said, because you filled in at the end of every chapter, there were exercises that you had to fill in. And I don't think you want everybody to read what you filled in on here. But I went back and read it, and very early in my career, I had laid out, after my husband and I were married, we laid out, okay, here's the plan. And here are some goals that I have. I want to publish in a national magazine. I want to get my master's degree. I want to be in a position that my husband can retire early. I had laid out all these things when I was in my late 20s. And this was much later. And I went back and read that and went, wow, I forgot that I had set those goals and
did them.
It's wonderful.
Even better yet, it's like, look what I said I was going to do, and I've done all of these.
It was wonderful. It does.
That's a cool thing.
I had a great partner. So that was.
Well, it's nice to have those things, and you stumble back on them later, and you forget. Like you forget that you make these lists, and then you're like, wow. It's easy to forget all the things that you accomplish in this world, I think, in general, especially as women. And to have it in writing and somebody to deliver back to you, like almost as a message, for the universe to be like, here you go, And
if you're feeling down today, look at this.
Yeah, you should look back over this, the notes you made. Yeah, that's really awesome.
So where were you before you moved back to Ohio? So, and what year was that? What was happening in life?
Okay, so I moved quite often. First, we moved for my husband's job when I wasn't working, and then we followed mine. And so I started in Indianapolis. We lived in Indianapolis. That's where my son was born. And then I moved to Cleveland, and then moved to Seattle, and then to Augusta, Georgia. And I retired in Augusta, Georgia. Great company. It was wonderful. I had an opportunity towards the end of my career to do a lot of mentoring, and a lot of the people, and I helped create a women in leadership group, and it was executive women like myself that were mentoring young women, and we came up with training programs and all kinds of activities that we did, and so I was able to do a lot of mentoring and towards the end of my career, which was fabulous. But when I was in Seattle, I call it my character building experience, where I was general manager there, and I had been just accepted into a new international job. I was very excited about it. We put our house up on the market. We were looking at homes in New Jersey, which was where the corporate headquarters were, the company I worked for. My husband was retired at the time. My son was in college. And, I used a Nordic track every morning. That tells you how long ago it was. Watched the news, did my Nordic track. And I started feeling a twinge, down my leg. Well, at a certain age, I hate to say this, but, you start having back trouble. And I thought, oh, well, this is not fun. I exercised too hard or something. Kept getting worse. I went to the doctor. They did x-rays. Yeah, you have a little this, a little that's fine. Do some physical therapy. Well, then I woke up one morning and I was completely paralyzed from my hips down. Couldn't walk, couldn't stand. Was in the hospital for a month where they tried to find out what was wrong with me, all kinds of tests. And they found out I had something called transverse myelitis, which I'd never heard of. I don't know if you had. It's a very rare condition. It's an immune disorder. It's kind of similar to MS, where your body's immune system inappropriately starts attacking your spinal cord for some unknown reason. Maybe you had a stomach virus or some other innocuous cold virus, and your immune system freaks out. And depending on how bad the damage is to your spinal cord, you have a lesion in your back. Some people, the statistics say a third of the people recover completely, a third of the people are permanently paralyzed, and a third of the people have some disability as a result of this. So I was in the hospital for a month where they did all the analysis, and then they sent me to a rehab hospital, which is where I was for a month. And they were teaching me towards the end on how to live in a wheelchair. They told me that, chances were good that I was going to be that third that could never walk again. And they released me. And through time, I got to the point where I could walk with a walker, and then I could walk with a cane. And I thought that I would be walking with a cane the rest of my life. And I was okay. I shouldn't say okay, but that was so much better than thinking I'm going to be in a wheelchair.
Yeah. You would resolve yourself to that.
Yes.
If this is the way it's going to be, I'm okay with this.
Yes.
But at least I got out of the chair.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, I was out looking for cool canes. I was going to get one with flames down the side.
all the time.
Yeah, some really cool. I'm not going to have one of those yucky old people kind of canes. And a lot of that I attribute to a good partner. Again, my husband was retired at the time, and he was a wonderful support in helping me. Those days when you wake up and say, "Yeah, I'm going to skip going to the therapeutic pool today. I just don't feel like it." And he's like, "Come on, let's go, let's go." Yeah. He helped me through that. So I was able to, and I've retained some challenges because of that. I have a neurostimulator implant because of the chronic nerve pain that I have. And I have some weakness in my legs. Unless you're a neurologist, you probably wouldn't notice when you see me walk, but it's there. But it's, again, so head and shoulders much better than I thought it would be, that I'm really grateful that I'm where I am. But it has made me two things. It's made me, first of all, very much more sensitive to people with disabilities. And I was able to do some volunteer work with some nonprofits when I was in Augusta for people with disabilities, and becoming aware. There's something about being in a wheelchair that all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's why those ramps are so important, and you don't realize. I'm sure that sometime prior to that happening to me, I addressed the person who was with the person in the wheelchair instead of the person in the wheelchair, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Because people tend to do that. You're in a wheelchair and somebody's pushing you and they're talking to the person. So does she want coffee? I'm like, well, I'm here. My brain works. My mouth works. My legs don't work, but I'm still here. I became much more sensitive to that. The other thing that happened is I've become really interested in the idea of resilience. What causes some people to be able to be resilient when life throws them a curveball? Whether it's losing a job or losing a spouse or some major medical problem. Some people are resilient and they're able to go on with their lives in whatever changed way that is after their horrible event. And some people, I don't want to say they're happy about whatever happened, because they're obviously not, but they sort of sink into it. It becomes who they are, and they live with it unhappily. Why? Why is it an inborn trait that some of us are more resilient than others? Or is it something that we can learn, or is it your life experience? What is it? Because I've had people tell me, oh my goodness, you're such a, wonderful that you were able to overcome this. And we talked about this and I said, what's the other option? Just say, okay, I give up. I'm going to sit over here in the corner. Right. To me, there wasn't another option. It wasn't like I'm some fabulous, wonderful athlete, that's able to overcome horrible adversity. It just seemed like that was the thing to do. So why do I have that attitude and some people don't? And I've been doing a lot of reading about resilience. And there's a theory of resilience, and some of the things I've read, some of the scientists and doctors have said, some of it has to do with your upbringing. Were you in an environment as a young person and a child where you were high expectations? Your parents or the people around you had very high expectations you were expected to live up to. And did you have unconditional love? Those are two attributes that help people develop resilience, as they're older. And I thought, that's interesting, because as I look back over my life, I think I had both of those things. My dad he really had very high expectations of his children, very high expectations. I was one of those people that got good grades always. So I would get always and 1B. He wouldn't say a word about the always. He'd say, well, now what happened?
What happened here to this
chemistry class? How'd you get this B? He had very high expectations. However, having said that, my parents were, without question, unconditionally loved me. I felt that way. They may not have always agreed with everything I did, and that might have gotten punished because I did something that they didn't agree with, but I never felt unloved. And I realized as a young adult, when I started seeing other people's lives, that everybody has that. That unconditional love and that that expectation, that you're going to achieve great things. My father told with 4 girls, especially given his background and, what he grew up with and his mindset, he said, as his belief was, if you have even average intelligence and a strong will, there are very few things you cannot accomplish.
Right.
Now, obviously, I'm not going to become a pro basketball player. I do not have. That's not going to. I don't care how hard I try. I'm probably not going to be a pro basketball. However, giving that, he was telling us that as young people when we were thinking about careers and what you're going to do with your life, that don't limit yourself based on what other people tell you. And his belief was that if you don't attain something, blaming other people and saying, well, I wasn't lucky, or this didn't happen, or I didn't get the same benefits that you did. He said, what you should look at it is, I wasn't willing to give up what was necessary to get it. And, that's been sort of something that's guided me through my life is when I've been unable to attain something and I really look at it and say, if I'd given up this and this and this and really focused on that, I probably could have gotten it. But you know what? I didn't want to. I didn't want to give up this house or this car or this job or whatever it was in order to get that.
Right.
So that's a smart thing to think about.
Well, it shifts and when I think about resilience, the dives I've taken on it has been, why do some people get out of things that are raised the same, have the same parents, and have very different outcomes in their lives? And is it because of victim mentality, right? Victim mentality versus a growth mindset, in that when something happens, it happens to you. Like, that's a victim mentality. This happened to me, so of course it happened to me. My luck is terrible.
Right.
And you start speaking these things, in my opinion, into existence, but that victim mentality keeps you stuck in that space that you can't. That person's not going to be like, wow, what is this trying to teach me? What do I need to give up? How do I reevaluate? How do I pivot? That person's not doing that. They're just going, see?
Yeah. And
I got bad luck. This is what happened to me again. Like, it's that whole victim mentality, and how do you shift people? And I do think it's trainable. I think you can have people, if they want to learn it. And I think some people are just born with I want to say an inquisitive mindset, right? You're a learner by nature. I think I'm a learner by nature. So in some ways that has helped in my resiliency over the years, is that I want to learn. And so what can I learn from this? What did I learn from this? What's the next thing I can learn? And so resiliency comes with a passion, I think, automatically, of learning, but it kind of pulls you out of that victim mindset of being like, oh, well, I don't have any choice because this just keeps happening to me.
Well, and sort of a visceral belief that I really do have a choice how I react to this.
Right.
I may not have a choice that this happened to me. I mean, some things do happen. A tree falls on your house. I mean, you didn't cause that. But I get to choose whether I'm going to say, oh my God, now what are we going to do? A tree fell on my house. Or if I say, okay, now I got to call this person and this person. So you choose how you react. You choose how you react to your adversity. And I think meditation helps a lot.
Yeah.
I started meditating many years ago, and I'm a sort of a type A personality, and I tend to jump before I think or speak, and then later say, oh man, if you just would have paused for 2 seconds, you could have done that better. You could have said that better. Meditation helps. And I think meditation helps give you that moment to say, okay, yeah, this really sucks. I really wish that this wouldn't have happened. Let me give myself, 3 or 4 minutes to feel sorry for myself. And then, now what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
As opposed to letting it overwhelm you and become who you are.
We're reading the Urquhart Tolle book. Well, we're doing it in book club currently, her and I. And that it brings me to that, right? That he talks about that. He's like, things happen to everyone. You get to choose how you respond to that. Either you're miserable or you're not. And that's really the same thing we're talking about, is you get a choice. Every time you have a choice, whether you're aware of the choice or not. And pausing and being like, in this current moment, is it really that big of a deal? Right? Like, we create a mental construct of whatever it is.
And there's an equation, right? It's E plus R equals L. So an event happens, your response is the outcome of that event. It has nothing to do with the event itself.
Right.
And so I love listening to everybody's like how these things happen, like the book club we're in. And that's so helpful about being in the now. But really all of this just boils down to what is your relationship with failure and where did you learn that from? So I love what he said around.
What are you willing to give up?
What are you willing to give up? Yes.
So I think if you boil it all down to failure, right? So if you think, okay, I failed at this thing because I didn't achieve this thing, and you can reframe that failure into, no, it wasn't a failure. I just didn't want to give up this thing.
Right.
Right. And if you can say, why did I fail at this other thing I wanted to do? And you can say, no, I didn't. I just wasn't in the moment for that decision. I didn't take a pause. I didn't meditate for that decision before I made it. It wasn't a failure. I learned from that. That's growth mindset. That's grit. Like all of it really boils down to what is my relationship with failure? If you think about it, going to when you're young, if you don't have unconditional loving parents, when you fail and they are mad, disappointed, make you feel like you're not worthy, of course, your relationship with failure then is going to escalate. And then when you get older, you can't live in the moment. Right. You can't live in the now because you're constantly worried about those past decisions that you made that you let your parents down. And where I learned E+R=O is through this book that a football coach wrote, right? So he didn't make that up. Someone else did. But he also has this theory as he is coaching athletes of avoid the BCD, which is blame, complain, defend. If you're in a spot where you're blaming someone else or complaining about something, or you're defending why you had to do this thing, and you're not living in the now. He did not say that in the book, by the way. But you are not. He is not Eckhart Tolle, you know what I mean? But he's like, you're not living in the now. You don't have a growth mindset. Like when you're living in those things. So what's very cool as you get older, you can take all these pieces of information and really sit with it and say, what is applicable to me in my life? And what can I do? Is it meditation? Is it realizing where those BCDs are coming in? Is it like truly saying, does this matter right now? Was this a past wound? Am I worried about the future? And then you can steer yourself in a way that's more comfortable, and your relationship with failure just changes because then nothing becomes a failure. Everything is learning opportunity.
And as we were talking about before, if you're surrounded as a young person, as you're learning and growing with unconditional love, you develop some confidence. Totally. And if you have confidence being able to weather those things and make those decisions and have that intelligence to say, yeah, you know what, I didn't, in that moment, it looked like the right decision. I didn't take the right moments. I learned from it. But that takes confidence. If you don't have that self-confidence, then you're just like, oh no, I screwed up again. There I go. Just like mom said,
yeah.
I'm worthless.
Or like the luck. Oh, see, I just have bad luck every time something like this happens to me.
Yeah. It's forfeiting control of your own choices and your own destiny. You're forfeiting the control of it to something else.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So any last thoughts on resilience? Anything else that you feel like that really entered your life and you had to learn through?
Well, as I said, I like to view myself as somebody who's very strong and resilient, and I've overcome a lot of things. And when my husband passed, it cut me off at the knees. And what since then I've studied about resiliency is it doesn't mean you're resilient in every moment, in every situation. It took me much longer to get to a point where my life was not gray and joyless because of the grief with my husband passing. And I didn't expect that. I was one of those people that I was meeting with a counselor. We knew he had a fatal condition, that it wasn't a surprise. So I was meeting with a counselor. I thought I was ready. We had done the financial things, as usual. He was very supportive. He was supportive in that way. And I knew it was going to be hard. And of course I'm going to grieve. And, I was intellectualizing all this, thought I was ready. It was truly the most devastating thing for me and very, very difficult for me to put that grief in a place where I could feel joy again. I can remember very clearly, even a year after he passed, talking to my counselor saying, I don't believe I'll ever feel joy again. My life no longer has color in it. It's black and white, it's gray, and I don't feel joy. I did get out of bed. I had, I was retired. I had a great tribe of women that were very supportive. I was in garden clubs and book clubs, and I was doing volunteer work. I got out of bed every day. I fed myself, I took care of the house. I was managing, but my life was gray, and so resilience doesn't mean you're going to bounce back and walk around with a smile on your face every day of your life.
Yeah, for sure.
I would like for us to touch on something that we talked about in our conversation at one of our events, because I thought this was really interesting, coming from somebody who defines themselves as a feminist as you have, that you came full circle, that when you started mentoring women in the corporate world, that your advice was not, you can have it all.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And that you have to choose. And I thought that was really interesting to come full circle from somebody to be like, let's be real for a minute and give real advice. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes. Just in my experience, what I had seen over my career was you can have it all, not necessarily all at the same moment. And you have to make choices in your life as to what's important to you. I had mentioned that I have great respect for women who have babies and go to school and work at the same time. I knew that was not possible for me to do all three of those things and be really good at all three. And I needed to be good. So I only took two of them. So my advice when I was mentoring, because I had some young women who worked for me who were very interested in being promoted in the organization and really wanted, that next promotion. And I was advising them and they wanted my advice. How do I get there? And they had young families and they felt like the company should accommodate them so that they could work only 40 hours a week and be able to, be at home with their children on weekends and not be on call at night and not have to do the travel, not have to get the master's degree, but they still wanted the executive roles. And, as gently as I could and as honestly as I could, I said, it's not possible for you, at least in this organization, to be an executive and not work those hours and not be willing to travel and not be willing to have, answering the emails and the text at night and on weekends and being available. That's a requirement of the job. And it doesn't mean you're not capable. You're very capable of doing this. So
you have to just want it.
Yes. Are you, and there are women who can do that because they have a support system at home. Mm-hmm. Perhaps, it might be a husband, it might be a mother, it might be, maybe they have enough money that they can hire a nanny to live in. I mean, there are people who can do that.
Right.
And if you're in that position, yay. However, you can't expect the world to give you this because you're not willing to give up the other things. So, and we don't realize when we're raising children that there is an end to that neediness of the child, which is a wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. As a mother, it's a wonderful thing. However, it's not forever, the kid's going to go to college.
Right.
And then you can, how old are you going to be when your youngest is 18 years old? How old are you going to be? Are you ready then? Will you be ready then to give up what you need to give up?
What can you do in the meantime? I feel like I really wish I had a mentor who would have said that. Like, what can you do to get ready for that time when it's your time?
Absolutely.
Because there's this perception of like, you start here and you climb.
Yes.
And that's not true.
No.
You might climb to the left and the right. You might get off the ladder completely for a little bit.
Exactly.
That's okay.
Absolutely.
Everyone's circumstances is different. You talked about this very early on the conversation. You understand why men climb fast. Because they do have that support person at home.
Right.
And that's not right, wrong, or indifferent. But if that's what you want for your career, girlfriend, then you find a husband that's going to support you in that.
Or somebody else. It doesn't have to be. I mean, some support system that allows you to do that.
Yep.
It's at least in my experience, I have found it's impossible to give as much as you need to give in the corporate world, at least, to get ahead without that sort of support. I just don't know
Absolutely.
how you can do it because the hours and again, depending on the company, but the travel and the hours and the commitment
It just
makes it
Yeah.
impossible to
Yeah.
do. And I've known women in my career that were executives that did have money from whatever thing that they had a nanny, a full-time nanny, and that made it possible for them to do their stuff.
Right.
I'm like, hey, you go,
Good.
girl. Good for
I just
you.
I thought it was brave to have that conversation.
It's a tough thing to hear.
In the early years. And because I think women, we're still pushing.
Yes.
We're still really pushing.
Yes.
And that means that in this transition, we're full-time housekeepers, we're full-time mothers, we're full-time keeper of the home and the tasks and all the stuff that needs to happen around the home. And we're a wife and we're a daughter and we're right. And I've talked to so many women who just get burned.
It's horrible.
And they feel like I'm failing at everything because I'm
Yes.
not doing everything to the degree I think I should be doing it, right? And yet what they're doing is impossible already, right? They're doing more than a human should ever be able to do. And
is there some room for joy? And I keep coming back to, whatever phase and season you're in your life, and this sounds like an old woman, but find joy. If this is the time in your life where you need and want to spend more time with your children than you do in your career, yay. Find joy in it. If you're one of those women who, and I hate to say this, I had a really good friend. She said, I'm a better mother when I work.
Yeah.
I am a better mother when I work. I'm not cut out to be home. I know that about myself.
Yeah.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Then find joy in your job. But like you were saying, women who are just beating themselves up and they're ragged and they're so
miserable.
unhappy.
Miserable, yeah.
What percentage of young women these days are on some sort of medication for depression or anxiety? And it's, their lives are out of control. We need to find ways to organize our lives so we have some joy. And, I'll bring this up, and this doesn't sound like a feminist, but when that short period of time when I was at home, it was difficult for me as a feminist to not have income. I had been working since I was 12. I had money, my own money. I'd lived on my own. The idea of staying home and living on my husband's income scared me to death. Yeah. I was just like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? And luckily, again, I had a good partner and we worked it out. He's like, well, if you're worried about it, you take care of the money, you take care of the finances, and I don't mind. But what I found, and this is another thing that I think our young people maybe don't understand or don't hear or don't internalize very well, is you can live very happily on a lot less money than you think.
Great.
I remember when we moved into a house and we couldn't afford to put living room furniture in the house. We couldn't afford it. So we didn't have living room furniture for several years. It wasn't the end of the world.
Right.
We went camping for vacation. We didn't get on airplanes and go places. We didn't go out to dinner. But I look back on that. It was a happy time of my life. I don't remember feeling, oh my God, I don't have living room furniture. My life's over, and I should be able to go to Paris. And I'm like, I remember it being a happy time, and we had plenty of food.
Right.
I bought my son's clothes. If he listens to this, I'm not sure he'll be thrilled about it. When he was 2, 3 years old, at a used clothing store, and I actually he wore better clothes than he would have if I bought him new, because there were a lot of really nice clothes.
Right. Yeah. Right.
When you're 2, you don't wear stuff out. It was lovely things.
Yeah.
But you can, and I cooked.
Right.
We didn't go to restaurants, but
and we could have a whole nother 2-hour podcast on the climb of capitalism and what that has done to people. And women have always had the buying power. They might not have been the breadwinners or had the most income, but they've always been the decision makers on what to buy, right? And we are in such a wild place with consumerism and capitalism right now that people do not understand that you do not need new shit all the time. And I am speaking about me to me also, by the way. I just realized in the last year of how aggressive that has gotten and how rampant it is in our culture of just consume without thinking of reuse, recycle, those type of things.
Oh, and one of the things I was attracted to Untamed Blossoms is your clothing swap. That's how I came to know of you and, heard you guys talk about this is about women supporting women, and you don't need, and I'm looking at my closet going, oh my God, this is awful, and the thought that I could come in and somebody else might be able to use it and I might be able to take what a wonderful thing to do. And what's wrong with that? What's wrong? I remember when during that time when I was at home and managing the money and half of what we had before. And I remember at that time, we got a big Sunday paper and it had that real thick, all of the ads.
Yeah.
And I can remember I always looked at the ads, it was fun.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that, new dishes, maybe I need that. Let's go shopping. And I went through it and I'm like, oh, this is really interesting how we're being targeted with all of this stuff, and I forced myself to quit looking at it. I'm just like, you don't need this stuff. You really don't need this stuff.
And advertise specifically the women.
Oh yeah.
Because they know that's who makes the decisions on the spendable income, and now like you look and, I'm a big TikTok fan. I'm on TikTok a lot, and you have this TikTok shop. And I just think like, how much makeup can we use? And I'm, by the way, pro makeup. You wear what you want, feel comfortable. But I mean, it's just the excessive amount of options and that's specifically targeted to women. And look at this new romper with these pockets and this cutout. And it's just like, wow, you don't see this amount of material made with a man involved or targeted to them, or just the amount of new. And, I think that's because a lot of their gadgets that are being targeted to them are much bigger and more expensive, but it's a death by 1,000 cuts when you're trying to make ends meet and you're trying to maybe leave a job that's toxic and just be able to find that joy in life, but you're being told every minute of every day, especially younger women, what you should be looking like and doing and wearing. That's hard.
Well, and I don't want to take away in any way from two-income families that it's necessary for both people to work in order to meet, to have food on the table and to pay the bills and to have a place to live.
Right.
In our society, that does exist. No question. And you can still have a job where you're not required to work 95 hours a week.
Right.
And still pay the bills.
Yeah. With high stress, high expectations.
Right, with high stress. You can work and we talk about the there was a phrase and I can't remember what it is, like the off ramp, that women take an off ramp during their career and work in a job that's less than during a period of time. And people were poo-pooing that, saying, well, we shouldn't have to do that. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with it. And I'm not just saying women, men could do the same thing. Mm-hmm. They can say, you know what, being around for my child right now is more important to me. I want to be able to leave work at 5 o'clock and go to my kid's soccer game. Sorry, but I need a job where I can do that.
Right.
And you can do that. You can say, whether you're a man or a woman, you can say, for this time in my life, this is what I'm willing to give to this organization. And yes, it might mean that I'm not going to get the pay that I may get 10 years from now when that's no longer the case. Right. And you have to be willing to accept that and say, you know what, I can do that because
there's always some sort of sacrifice no matter what, right? Especially as a parent, I would say as a working parent, either you're missing things with the kids or you're not advancing because you're choosing a job that allows you the flexibility you need with the kids. You might not advance as quickly as you would otherwise. And I was a nurse for 30 years. I chose jobs based on my kids' schedule. Like I worked the jobs. Now, could I have been a VP? And maybe if I'd have wanted to, but I didn't want that. It was more important for me to be with my kids and to make that choice.
And I guess the message for young people and families, men and women, is, maybe try for a while, keep your jobs, but try for a while spending less for 6 months and see, okay, let's try this for 6 months as if you weren't working. We'll just sock it away, but let's just try it and see what happens.
I read Ina Garten's memoir, and What was so striking about her story and her life is, and everything we're talking about is really reminding me of her. It's just like really the key to her success was having a partner she could have honest conversations with about what they both needed to do to accomplish the kind of success they both wanted.
Wow.
And it's that
Huge.
partnership, the collaboration, the okay, now you're taking a high-paying job in Paris. This is Ina's life.
Yes.
To be super clear. And then I'm going to take a step back and not open a new thing right now. And I'm gonna take back now so you can do this. Okay, great. Now you're back. Now I'm gonna have
Absolutely.
a camera crew on our house doing these crazy things, and you're gonna have to be here. And it's that give and take and the ebb and the flow and the real conversations of now is your time. Now is your time and I'm going to support you.
Absolutely.
Okay, now you take a backseat. Now I would like to go do this.
Yes.
And that collaboration, I have to imagine, is something instead of the fight and like we need this. It's not always about that. It's about having the real life conversations of whose turn is it.
I think, and I'm very fortunate in that I had that sort of relationship, and it was really the key as I look back on my life in why I was able to be successful was because I had a partner that felt that same way. But and part of, I think, having that happen is having as a couple a long-term goal that you both agree on. If you can both agree on, okay, here's where we want to be at the end of this journey, then it becomes easier to talk about, okay, what are we going to do to get there? Yeah. And you might have detours along the way and say, oh man, we thought we would be here at this point in our lives together and we're not, but still we're heading that direction. Yeah. It's sort of like when you're learning to drive, you're taught to look out where you're going, not to your fender. Because if you look at your fender, you tend to go this way. But if you are looking at the what's in front of you, then I think you tend to get there. So the same thing in a career with a partner. If at the beginning or early in your career, you can say, here's where we want to be, then making those decisions as you go along the way become easier because you can say, is this going to get us there or not? Yeah. Right. Are we heading off in another direction? And, maybe we've changed our mind and that's where we want to go now. We, when we were 25, that made sense, but boy, was that dumb. We don't want to do that anymore. We want to do this. As long as you both are saying, here's where we want to be long-term, then the short-term decisions become a little easier because you can say, okay, here's this job opportunity. It's for you. That means I have to give something up. Okay, where do we want to be when we retire? Does this get us there or not? Right. Then it becomes a little easier for you as a couple to make those choices. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Do you have some women you want to shout out that you feel like have really inspired you, changed you, whether you know them or not?
Well, I was listening to some of your earlier podcasts and they all mentioned these wonderful women. And I just have to shout out to my mother. As I've thought about, her life and what she taught me, there were so many things that were so profound that I didn't realize until I was older and I looked back on it. She was a wonderful woman. She was very supportive, very loving, no nonsense. She was the one, if you were in the hospital, you wanted to have her with you because, she would just say, okay, here's what we're doing. My father, he's such a sensitive soul that he couldn't stand to see us in the hospital. Any of the kids, he had to go home and do something else. Mom was the one you wanted there. But many things she did. I mentioned one of them. I remember when I was going through a crisis of faith in my young adulthood, and she said, over my life, I just remember that God is love. However you define God in your life, and if you just kind of stick with that, the rest of it doesn't matter. And so many times in my life, when I've gone to different churches or had different beliefs, studied Buddhism for a while, and what's right, what's wrong. Trying to figure out the morality of your life. Mom saying, just think, it's pretty simple for me. God is love. I'm like, oh man, that is so simple and so profound. There were many, many things she did. She told me when I remember in high school, going through teenage angst, worrying about yourself and having a tough time. And she said, again, in my life, what I found was when I start worrying about myself too much, I try to find a way to give to others. And changes your perspective in life. So I did some volunteer work when I was in high school. And it's true, in your life, when you start feeling really selfish, if you find a way to give to others, it solves that problem. She was a wonderful woman. That's one. The other one is a really dear friend of mine from Augusta. Her name's Kathleen Nohe. And she's a very free spirit and just a wonderful woman. She was very supportive and helpful to me when I was going through my grief. She was my Tai Chi teacher. I love Tai Chi. She was my first Tai Chi teacher. She's a Reiki practitioner. She also does reflexology. She's certified to do reflexology. She is just a wonderful, supportive, one of those few, you make a connection with somebody in your life, and we made a connection with each other so different from each other. I was this corporate person, and she's very free spirit. She's one of those people who learned early in her life that she only wanted to work in a job that was enough to support herself, and she's not tied to material things in her life. And that's how she's lived her life. And she has a beautiful little home with fabulous things in it that, some things that she's inherited. If you go to her home, she can tell you every cup in the cupboard, who gave it to her grandmother. Every possession that she has meaning. And she doesn't have that many possessions because she works, in order to take care of herself, but she's not a materialist. And she's taught me so much, and she's still a very dear friend. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like every spiritual teacher I've ever come across feels that same way about things and money. And
Yes.
It's just such a good lesson and good to have those people around.
Yeah. Old souls. They say that if you come back and you're an old soul, they usually are quirky, weird, and they have a lot of potential and they're really intelligent, but they don't do a lot with it on earth. They don't have any intentions. They're just here to experience and to live their own lives. And, and when you look around and you think about the people that that are like that, you're like, they're all exactly like that.
Yeah.
She's been such a wonderful teacher for me,
Yeah.
And
super smart.
Oh, yes.
Like could have done 100 things.
Oh, yes.
Chose not
Very
to.
Very creative.
Yeah.
She's just wonderful. She hasn't always tells me about, just put it out to the universe. It's time, it will come to you. You have to have faith. It's going to come to you. It always has. Look back,
She's been right this whole time.
And she was telling me when I moved here from Augusta, it happened really fast. My house sold much quicker than I thought it would. And my house here that I was building wasn't ready yet. I'm like, oh my God, I'm homeless. What am I going to do now? And she said, it was right. It was right. It was time for you to move. I came to Ohio from Georgia because my parents were elderly and my sisters, needed some help in navigating that. And I had a new granddaughter. And it was difficult for me to leave because I was surrounded by such a wonderful network of supportive women. I had a hard time thinking about leaving and coming back here. But she helped me with that because she said, when the time's right, it's easy. If you think back to your life, the things you beat, over and over and over, trying to make them happen, it probably wasn't the right direction for you. When it's the right direction, the universe kind of lines everything up for you. Works faster.
And says, here you go.
That's right.
You have a new husband waiting for you.
That's right. And I did. Thank goodness I moved.
Yeah. It's divine timing. I love that. Well, Colette, thank you for coming. We really appreciate you coming on, and all the work that you've done over the years for women. We appreciate you, and
we're thankful you came to us. We're so thankful.
Yes,
you stumbled on our clothing swap.
Yes, and I'm so glad to meet you. It was wonderful coming to your full moon get together. That was great. I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved it. And I want to hear about your book club. So hear about that.
Well, just remember you can stream any of our episodes on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, YouTube, Spotify, and please give us a follow on social media. We would really appreciate it.
Yep. And if this episode resonated for you guys, anybody in your lives, please share it. Until next time, love you.
Love you.